Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is lynndjung. I'm an author, a writer. I don't know if you guys have a distinction between the two. I don't personally, but I know they're not interchangeable for everyone. Okay, let's start over. Hi, my name is lynndjung. I'm a writer and I make videos on here about books, writing, and travel and whatever else I feel like. And today I'm going to talk about some of my abandoned writing projects in a little fun game that I've made for myself. I feel like you guys have probably seen these before. They're pretty popular around the writing and book communities, but I'm organizing it as I speak, which seems like a bad idea. I've gone ahead and made myself a little tier ranking thing for my 15 abandoned story ideas. So these are basically all novella or novel ideas that I came up with and then just stopped working on at some point in the past 5 or 6 years or so. I currently have 13 active story ideas, so ideas that I'm working on actively or will be pursuing in the next couple of years, trying to finish. But these are the ones that, as I was organizing those 13 ideas, these are the ones that did not make the cut. Since I'm honestly one of those people who keeps my story ideas and the details about them pretty close to my chest most of the time, and I kind of want to change that, I figured it'd be fun to sort of go through all of them and talk about them briefly and why I just don't think they're worth pursuing, and also tier rank them. I'm gonna start recording my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. So I have 5 categories here, going in order from the best to the worst, I guess. Number 1 is I actually still want to write this. Number 2 is parts of this could be salvaged, so I don't really see myself writing the main story anymore, but maybe characters or themes or different little world building elements could be used in something else. Number 3 is I don't really remember her TBH. I come up with a lot of ideas. The way that I process them so I don't end up just ricocheting between different ideas all the time is that I write them down really quickly in my notes app, just like a brief sketch of characters, an outline maybe, a little synopsis or pitch, and then I put them there and leave them until I maybe have time to revisit the idea. Number 4 is boring, which is just I think the idea is boring. And number 5 is what was I thinking? All of these are listed below. I use the word whip in every single one of these, even though I don't believe in that word. I don't like saying it. We're gonna be saying it this video. I'm sorry about that if you're also like, whip is kind of my writing moist. Something about it just makes me uncomfortable. But the first one we have here is called Delinquent Whip. So this was an idea that I think I conceived originally, probably somewhere in high school. I was always a really big comic book, sort of Marvel and DC fan. I didn't yet realize that superheroes aren't a thing in young adult literature. Unless they're IP, so actual like Marvel or DC existing comic book characters written for a teen audience, they just don't really happen. And if they do, they're usually not that big. But I developed this idea for fun. I still remember it relatively well. Basically, it was set in a world where superheroes are very, very closely regulated, and if you have powers and you're just like an average Joe, then you're just not supposed to use them or talk about it. You're just supposed to pretend they're not there. And this is because there was a huge international incident involving this world's version of like an early Justice League. They were all planet themed. Of course, like a bunch of people died. Half that team died, the rest scattered. One is one of the main characters. She's now a middle-aged woman with a child who also has her same set of powers, and she is trying to band together a younger version of her original team. And because this is very much against the law, she does this by recruiting teenagers out of like a juvenile detention facility for superpowered teens. So this character is very much not a good person. Like, she is indisputably like in the wrong. She should not be enlisting children to do this. But I came up with this team and I was really just like exploring, I don't know, being a teenager and those changes. The original title for this I think was like Growing Pains, which I kind of think was perfect. Like, it just works with the theme. It's these kids who are just being burdened with these horrible missions and horrible levels of responsibility because they're just kind of doing messed up things, but they're also just suffering through the same puberty cycle that all of us do. And I really liked the characters. The kids that I came up with, all of them were based loosely off of a different type of cryptid, I think. The one that I remember the best was basically like the Hulk, but a Sasquatch, and she was a girl, and she was always in the Sasquatch body. Like, she could not turn back. Like, she got stuck. She has a lot of like body image and femininity issues, and just like exploring that was really interesting with that sort of power set and that character. That's the only one that really jumps out to me, but I had fun with this project for sure. Like, I really liked the characters. I developed them quite a bit. It's just that I don't like superhero shit anymore. I think, like virtually everyone alive on this planet Earth who has watched a movie in the past like 5 years, I am definitely feeling that superhero fatigue. At one point in time, I think this could have made like a really cool webcomic or something similar, but I think that time has passed. Like that window of opportunity has passed. That being said, I do like the characters a lot. I like the idea of a team of basically teenage vigilantes having to navigate their youth while also just dealing with these issues, and all of them sort of facing different teenage challenges like Euphoria, but less awful, or maybe more awful because they have to like kill people. I don't know where the bar is anymore. So I did like that, and I think the characters are developed enough that I could pretty easily transfer them into different stories. So with all that in mind, I think this one is going to go into parts of this could be salvaged, mainly the characters and their dynamics. The next whip on here is Bones Whip, which was like a gothic urban fantasy. Like definitely I just watched the Batman and it was like, I really like something about this world and its essence just speaks to me. Like Gotham was done so well in that movie, and I just kind of wanted those visuals in like a completely different story. So this one was like a little bit of a low-key Romeo and Juliet retelling. Instead of being this like 13-year-old girl, Juliet is the heir to a powerful family of necromancers. Everyone in this book was a necromancer, hence the bones. And a boy from a rival family falls in love with her, but she completely is just like manipulative, mansplain. What's the last one? Just, you know, manipulate, mansplain, whatever the third one is. She completely takes advantage of him. She's like got this whole gambit going on, and I honestly love that for her, but I think ultimately the world building just wasn't developed enough and it was too derivative of something else that I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And also I don't remember what the plot was at all. I don't think there was one. So I'm gonna put this in I don't remember her 2BH because I did not remember this one until I saw the little note in my notes app. Next up is Rattlesnake Whip, which is another one where I just kind of saw an aesthetic or a vibe and it created like a really strong visual for me. I'm a very visual person, despite being one of those people who can't picture the apple, if you know what I'm talking about. So this was a Midwestern gothic horror, which is crazy. I've never been to the Midwest. That's how you know I'm a shallow bitch. The main character I remember was this really jaded lone wolf woman. For some reason, I was just writing jaded lone wolf women in like a period of a year or so. I do this thing where I get fixated on a specific trope and I come up with like 7 ideas in a row that just utilize that one trope because I'm trying to find the best fit for it. And then one of those ideas will become a story usually, but the rest just become garbage. I just toss them aside. So this was one of those. I figured out a different use for the lone wolf girl. So this one is like an exorcist or a ghost exterminator, and she comes to this super haunted Midwestern town and she enlists the help of this $5 phone psychic who's like, I'm clearly just a scammer with weak psychic power, like why'd you need me? They fall in love. That's pretty much it. Oh, it's also the main character's last job. Someone read her future and basically was like, you go to this town, you do this job, and then you're gonna die in the process. And that is pretty much all I've got. I also have a random image in my head of knowing that the psychic's little shitty neon sign is supposed to be like a symbol, like a beacon of light for the main character, something to draw her in. And that's it. That's all I've got. I think this one is a little bit boring. I think it's a little boring, mainly because I didn't have a plot in mind, I just had vibes. And I respect that, but that just isn't me. I need to have a good plot. To me, this one's a little bit boring. Next up is Chef Whip, and I was confused when I saw this one because I have an actual like main project going on that is about chefs and is set in the real world. I know. This one is not that. This one, I don't know what I was thinking actually, but I don't think it's gonna go in that category. It was like a novella, and what it was a story set in the world of my tiger story, Tiger Whip, which is not a whip anymore. It's out on submission. And that world is based off of Korean mythology. This book was, again, set in that universe, but was set in a time period hundreds of years prior. It followed a chef who is slowly turning to jade because of a family curse, where one of her ancestors like spurned the love of a god. So now all the women in her lineage are cursed. And she ends up utilizing the help of a demigod. He's like a war god, so he just fights people's wars for them. It was also like loosely based off of the Three Kingdoms era, so there was a lot of wars going on. Instead of getting him to fight a war, she's like, can you come with me? Because actually she forces him to come with her by, I think, stealing something from him. And she's trying to collect these like 3 magical spices to make the best dish of all time before she dies. Not a lot happened here. I actually did end up salvaging this one 4 parts already, so I came up with another story in this same time period in this world that is sort of like using this dynamic of like just some girl and then like this deity. Mainly the male character like really intrigued me, where he has been fighting other people's wars his entire existence and he doesn't want to do that anymore. He's been so dehumanized though that he has no idea what purpose looks like or what life looks like. It's just really depressing. I definitely liked some parts of this and I wrote a good amount of it. I wrote like probably 20,000 words for this at one point, but just nothing happens. Like they collect their little items, they go on their little quest, they meet people and add them to their little like found family, but nothing else really goes on. This story was also sort of written as a myth that exists in the world of like tigers. So hundreds of years in the future, they're telling this story as a myth and it's like part of the, I don't know, folklore canon. It's like weird that this exists. Like it's weird that I wrote it. I think I was just writing it to develop some ideas and also to develop some of the world a little bit more, but in the end I think this was kind of boring and I understand why I abandoned it even though I got relatively far into the writing process. Next is Seafoam Whip. This one was interesting. It was about a non-binary motel desk clerk. Their family like owns the motel. It's by the ocean. It's like a cute little misty ocean town, which is my bread and butter. That's, you know, where I like to live. And they've been told their entire life to basically never go into the ocean. So they have no social life because everyone who lives by the water wants to be in the water. And then one day they accidentally like go into the ocean just a little bit, and that night the like ocean deity comes and visits them and is like, I claim you as my bride. Bride in big quotations. There's like gender stuff going on, right? The deity just ends up like visiting them every night and they start to fall in love, which is cute. I think that's a cute little contemporary fantasy, sort of soft, quiet, cozy fantasy story, but it's just not what I like to write. And I think I came up with a couple of like weird conflicts that felt out of place, like people are trying to capture or control the deity, but it just wasn't working because obviously the story lends itself to something where you focus more on the connection between these two people and how it develops over time through like just this quiet loneliness and fulfilling that void in each other versus like actually fighting to save each other. And it's just not the sort of thing that I could see myself writing. To me, this one is boring, and that is why I set it aside. Next up is Gold Dust or Bust Whip. That is a phrase from a 4th grade play that I did that every, I think, Californian elementary schooler has to do. It's maybe not called Gold Dust or Bust every time, but that phrase probably is always in there. So this one was set during the Gold Rush, or a fake version of the Gold Rush. It was like a fantasy version of the Gold Rush in California. It occurred to me after I went to Monterey and went to the Gold Rush Museum there. The little details about that time period really stuck to me. It's a very interesting time period, I will say that. So I developed this world where gold is used for magic, so it's very valuable, and then the boom towns that mine it are controlled by like factions or single people that heavily regulate the gold flow and have like a chokehold on the industry. And they're basically mafia bosses. Like, they're not good people. They're crime lords. They're engaged in all sorts of shady business. And the main character was working in a gold rush town as like a child, escaped because she has a Midas touch, and one person found out and came after her. So she's been on the run for a while, but she has to come back because she left her sister behind. So this was like an exciting idea. This was like a cool, fresh fantasy idea. I can't say I've ever seen like Gold Rush fantasy before personally. The only thing is, I felt like I was stepping out of my lane. I was learning a lot about immigrant experiences during the Gold Rush, and I felt like that was relevant to me, and then I quickly realized it was not, and it was not something that is part of my like personal cultural history, and I kind of don't think I can like pursue that perspective. The immigrant story is really what spoke to me originally, but I do think I developed the world enough that I could still come up with something interesting. It just wouldn't be what I originally envisioned, and I would have to change a lot of things around to make it work. I do also really like the idea of like a Midas touch girl in the Gold Rush era. I think that's cool. It's just sort of in a gray area for me where I don't think I can go out of my lane this much, and also I feel weird if I take out like the immigrant perspective and a lot of the bloodshed, then it's going to be a relatively sanitized version of the Gold Rush, which was like a really traumatic time period, as most of American history was for a lot of different groups of people. And I just feel weird glorifying that, and I feel weird glorifying any part of American history, honestly, in fantasy. I actually still want to write this, but I put it aside, at least for now, because something has to click, something has to be really different for me to work on it. So I will put this in. I actually still want to write this, even though it's not an active want, it's more of a passive want. It's like something that I'll revisit probably a couple years down the line and see how I'm feeling about it. The next one is Yeoman Whip. I don't know why I called it that. Is it Yeoman? I've only ever seen this word written, and for some reason this word looks like really Korean to me. I just don't know how to say it. So this one was just early colonial period Korea Robin Hood. I think that's cool. I think that's sexy. I didn't come up with anything beyond that. And for some reason I hit a wall with developing this idea. Like I could not figure out how to make the characters work. I think I haven't read enough like Robin Hood shit to really do it the way I was sort of envisioning it. I actually still want to write this. This next one is called King's Blood Whip. It's not much of an idea. It basically was like, what if there were still a Korean royal family and it's kind of the future and they sort of have their last prince and he's just a huge dick. I think my main character was like one of his guards or something, and she gets like wrapped in this conspiracy to assassinate him. It was very like sci-fi for some reason, like very future tech, but sort of in a dumb way where I just couldn't come up with scientific justification for things, and there wasn't anything interesting about the science of it. It was just like tech backdrop for this like story about murdering a royal person. I don't know. Honestly, what was I thinking? I think I just wanted those like hot enemies to lover vibes. I don't know. This one's also pretty old. Next one is Unlucky Whip. This is also confusing to me because I have a version of this in existence. Like it is being written kind of in the background. She has supernaturally bad luck. If she steps outside, 5 birds will shit on her. Every elevator she's in will break. Anything like technological, like she can't have a phone that isn't a flip phone because they just die within a couple days. She does not have email because like scammers will find her and hack into her, whatever. She can only use cash and can't carry larger than $100 bills because she'll get mugged. It's like insane how bad her luck is. But she's got a very upbeat outlook on it, and she's a contract worker for demons. That was a lot at once. So the idea behind this character is that at one point in her childhood, which was backtrack. She grew up deeply embedded in like a cult of demon slayers, and at one point in her childhood she got possessed, and this created a lot of issues for her. This is where her bad luck came from. Like the demon possession left a mark on her. It also made her very jaded about the whole like demon slaying thing, because her mom would have killed her to get that thing out if she hadn't somehow figured it out on her own. So she moves away with her dad. She abandons her younger sister, who gets raised in this cult and becomes like their best person. She has like a relatively normal but very unlucky life, but is doing good. Her dad's like an art professor at Berkeley. He's like a nice normal man. Then she picks up contract work because for some reason working for demons is like the only thing that doesn't go horribly wrong for her. Like she can't get fired if a job is a contract job, right? It's only like a couple days. And what she does for these demons is she gets little missions to find people who have broken their like demon contracts. In this world, people summon demons specifically to make contracts. They're all like sort of loosely categorized by the different sins that they fulfill. Like for example, you summon like a greed demon to get more money, and you have to promise something in exchange. Normally it'll be a couple years off your life as the demon like possesses you. So if people like cut and run from this, then she goes and pursues them so that they fulfill their contract. If a demon overstays its contract, she goes after that demon. It's very balancing the scales, which she thinks is like karmically good and helps with her bad luck. But then she gets hired by a person she grew up with in the cult. She remembers him as like a horrible bully, but he's like a relatively normal adult, and that is now her sister's fiance, and her sister has gone missing. So she and this childhood enemy have to like find her sister, and she has to like re-infiltrate the cult and like deal with her mom, and it's all this stuff, and there's like a huge conspiracy going on. So that was that. It's like really different now. There's more to it and also less to it. I like the story a lot. I really like the characters. They've all been with me long enough that I like kind of have an attachment to them. As I was explaining it, I did feel silly, but it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun to have a character with such like a big disadvantage, because I really have to stretch to be like, okay, in this situation, what is the most moderately to madly unfortunate thing that can happen? And that's always like really fun. Like I really have to think about each scene and each moment. Her luck is almost a character. Like it has a personality, it has some sass. So this was a very funny story, but also it had a lot of dark themes, and then I just sort of ended up making it darker, and I think that's what the difference between the version I'm working on is and the version this is. I actually still want to write this. You know what, I think what it is that this probably will never find a market, which is why I feel so comfortable explaining so much of the plot. So yeah, that's Unlucky. Next one is Alice Whip. I was really into like the cyberpunk thing for a little bit. I don't remember why. It must have been something I watched or read because ever since then, I just haven't cared about cyberpunk at all. Maybe I made this out of spite. Anyway, it was a cyberpunk whip. Main character wakes up with total amnesia and she has to navigate this like cyberpunk Alice in Wonderland world that just feels completely foreign to her because she just doesn't remember it. It was sort of like introspective and weird. She's trying to figure out what happened to her basically and solve the murder that happened at the same time as her like amnesia. And there was a lot of like weird twists and turns, so it was sort of a cyberpunk thriller and it was fun, I guess, but cyberpunk, like what was I thinking? This one, Shin Ramyeon Whip is... So I spent weekends in Koreatown with my grandparents growing up, and I love thinking about Koreatown as a setting. My adult contemporary is actually set there. This was also one set in Koreatown and like LA in general, and it was about just basically a Korean American woman who is an assassin. So John Wick, but make it ethnic. There wasn't a lot to it. I quickly abandoned this idea when I realized that every version of it would be like way too derivative to be worth pursuing. I think the title was like Shin Ramyeon Murder Girl or something like that. Like he was, I don't know, just punchy and kind of sassy. But yeah, ultimately kind of boring. And I came up with a better idea that's set in the setting I wanted to write in, so it worked out. Next one was also assassins. I really liked John Wick, I guess. Helen of Troy Whip was a retelling of the Trojan War with John Wick assassin families. Yeah, that's basically all there was to it. I like Greek mythology, but this was like a weird roundabout way to write a retelling, I think. I don't know what I was thinking. Oh, next is Bounty Hunter Whip. So this is one of my rare-ish sort of like true space fantasy ideas. Let me read the concept. It was very Star Wars, where it was two semi-competent intergalactic skip tracers escort a runaway princess off her home planet and get caught in a civil war. I don't know. It was just like Star Wars fanfiction, honestly. I don't find this very interesting. I feel like space fantasy can be so much more interesting than like people living on the edge. I feel like thinking more about the intergalactic planetary politics is more my speed now, which is how I would write this if I were writing it now. I did like the characters. It was a lot of fun to just come up with wacky space monsters. There's one who was just like a giant fucked up like cyborg Redwall rabbit, like fighting rabbit, you know, if you guys ever read Redwall. Yeah, so other than a couple of character concepts, I just don't find this that interesting. I'm gonna put it in boring. Daisy's Whip. This was a middle grade, which it was also like a weirdly dark middle grade, so I don't know if it would have worked. I just pictured the main character as like very young. She's like the 12-ish, maybe younger daughter of a folklore researcher. Her mom gets taken by this beast known as the Holly King, this like fae deity, just very old, lives in the forest. Every adult in her life is like trying to stop her, but she's trying to save her mom. So it's one of those like spunky supernatural stories. I sort of like Spiderwick Chronicles vibes. I just like really like thinking about the different species of magical creatures. I'm a zoologist, so applying that sort of logic, scientific ecology logic to magical creatures is really fun for me. It was more about my desire to fulfill that as opposed to like actually writing a middle grade about this girl. But I think it was cute. I think it was like a very lonely book because the main character doesn't have anyone on her side. She fully has to rely on herself, which I feel like is a consequence of how I felt as a kid at that age. Yeah, other than that, I don't really remember her, TBH. So that's where I'm putting her. I feel like this could have been a good idea. I just don't write middle grade, and I feel like there are better outlets for that itch I want to scratch of just coming up with a fake zoology compendium. And the last one here is Labyrinth Whip. I can't believe I'm almost done. I'm so happy. I was gonna film another video after this because I have a cute top on underneath, but I might not. Labyrinth Whip was, I can see it, like this concept, these concepts that get stuck in my head and I just have to come up with a million different ideas that fit them until I find one that actually works. So this was like my Scooby-Doo. I loved Scooby-Doo growing up as a kid. I loved the idea of just, I mean, tale as old as time, a bunch of really resourceful and smart and kind of dumb at the same time teenagers solving mysteries. But I wanted that, but like really gritty. So I had this where it was like a bunch of people who get dumped in a labyrinth. They wake up with like zero memories and their only memories are their own first names and they see writing on the wall that's like, you have like this amount of time to get out of here. And they're all sort of a different high school cliche. Like there's a jock, there's like a straight A student, there's a goth kid, a punk. They're just all different genres of teenager. I don't know what else to say. And they have to work together to get out. So it's like Breakfast Club, but not really, because if like a bunch of them die. It's like if Breakfast Club had monsters that eat you, because it was a monster labyrinth. So this was a fun idea. I just eventually ended up coming up with something that had that Scooby-Doo like classic high school dynamic, group dynamic, but was more interesting to me in terms of world building. Like this is definitely more of a horror sort of psychological thriller, and I didn't necessarily want that. I wanted the ghosts and the monsters, but I didn't want it to be like a thriller energy. And I didn't like that they all lost their memories and didn't know what was going on. I mean, that's a very easy fix, I guess, now that I say it, but there were just too many elements here that I was like kind of meh on. But I do think parts of this could be salvaged. Actually, yeah, I'm sticking with it. I think there's definitely some ideas here that could be salvaged. Some of the characters and their dynamics were a lot of fun. I liked playing with those archetypes. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all of them. I've tier ranked all my ideas. I thought this would be more positive leaning when I was like writing them. I was like, I remember this was cool, but no, most of these are kind of boring. It is interesting that I have those 3 up top. I don't feel motivated to write any of them at this point, except for maybe like the unlucky one, because that one's so far along. It had like 50,000 words at one point. That's a project that will never see the light of day, but I've just been working on for fun and to satisfy my need to like follow that character's story. I think that pretty much wraps it up, so thank you so much for coming along and watching this probably way too long video. Let me know if you guys want to see more videos in this style. I don't really know what else I could tier rank, but I could come up with something. So thank you again, and I will see you guys next time.